Chapter 1. The Rise of a Warrior. In the rugged highlands of Tigray, where jagged cliffs kiss the sky and the air carries the whispers of ancient warriors, a child was born who would etch his name into the annals of history. His name was Alula Engida. The sun rose and fell over his youth, each day forging him in the crucible of a land where survival demanded strength, cunning, and unwavering will. The son of peasant parents, Alula's fate was not carved in the soft stone of privilege, but chiseled in the unyielding rock of adversity. The young boy grew up with the wild spirit of the Ethiopian plateau coursing through his veins. He had no noble blood, no powerful lineage to call upon. Yet, the destiny awaiting him was not that of an ordinary man. Even in his early years, he showed an uncommon brilliance, a mind as sharp as the swords wielded by the warriors of his land, and a heart that burned with the fire of 1,000 battles yet to be fought. It is said that Alula's first lessons in warfare came not from the disciplined ranks of the empire's armies, but from the harsh trials of life itself. He wrestled with the elements, his body hardening like tempered steel. He studied the ways of the land, the movements of the rivers, the rhythm of the winds, and the pulse of the mountains. Nature became his first instructor, teaching him patience, strategy, and resilience. As a young man, his ferocity in combat and strategic brilliance caught the attention of Emperor Yohannes IV, a ruler with a keen eye for talent. The emperor saw in him not just a warrior, but a man destined to shape the fate of a nation. Thus, Alula rose through the ranks, proving himself time and again in battles that tested the very core of his being. He did not merely lead men into war, he became war itself, a storm sweeping across the battlefield with unrelenting force. His name, Abanega, meaning Father of Victory, was not a title gifted lightly. It was earned in the crucible of battle, in the cries of the vanquished, and the cheers of the victorious. He became a legend before his prime, a warrior whose mere presence sent shivers through the spines of his foes. He fought not for personal glory, but for the sovereignty of Ethiopia, for the land that had birthed him, for the people who placed their faith in his sword. Alula's rise was not without challenges. The courts of power are often more treacherous than the battlefield, filled with whispers more deadly than arrows. He navigated the web of politics with the same skill he wielded a blade. Enemies, both seen and unseen, sought to diminish his influence, yet he stood unshaken, for he knew his true strength lay not in the favor of courtiers, but in the loyalty of his men and the trust of his emperor. In 1876, he was appointed as the governor of Mereb Melash, the northern frontier of the Ethiopian Empire. It was here that his legacy would truly begin to take shape. The region was a powder keg, a land where the ambitions of European imperialists clashed with the sovereignty of Ethiopia. Alula understood the stakes. He knew that Ethiopia stood at the crossroads of history, and he was determined to ensure that his country did not become another pawn in the great European conquest of Africa. He fortified the region, strengthened its defenses, and trained his forces with an intensity that rivaled the great generals of history. He was more than a warrior. He was a strategist, a leader who saw beyond the immediate battle to the grander vision of an unbroken, unconquered Ethiopia. But even as the sun reached its zenith in Alula's rise, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The Europeans, with their insatiable hunger for domination, cast their gaze upon Ethiopia. The Italians, the British, the Mahdists, all had ambitions that threatened the sovereignty of the land he swore to protect. He knew that his greatest battles were yet to come, that the echoes of war would thunder through the valleys of Ethiopia, calling him once more to the front lines. The warrior had risen, but his journey was far from over. The battles that would define him, the victories that would carve his name into eternity, were just beginning. Ethiopia needed a defender. Alula Engida was ready. Chapter 2: Defender of the Empire. The land trembled under the weight of war drums, and Ras Alula, now a seasoned warrior, stood at the helm of Ethiopia's fate. The young boy who had once challenged villagers for baskets of bread had now become the sword and shield of his empire. His name alone sent shivers through the ranks of his enemies. To his people he was a fearless guardian, to his adversaries he was an unstoppable force. A call to arms. The Mahdist threat. As the sun rose over the Ethiopian highlands, Alula's gaze turned toward the west, where a storm was brewing. The Mahdist forces, fierce Sudanese warriors driven by religious fervor, had set their sights on Ethiopia's borders. Their path was marked by blood and destruction, and Alula knew that if they were not stopped, they would swallow the empire whole. With the blessing of Emperor Yohannes IV, Ras Alula led his warriors into the heart of the conflict. His forces, though fewer in number, were disciplined and fearless. The Battle of Kufit in 1885 would be the proving ground of his legendary status. Osman Digna, the Mahdist commander, believed he would overrun the Ethiopians with sheer numbers, but he had underestimated the Lion of Tigray. As the battle raged, arrows darkened the sky, and the clash of swords echoed through the valley. Alula, mounted on his war horse, led charge after charge, striking fear into the hearts of his enemies. Though the Ethiopians suffered great losses, they emerged victorious. The Mahdists were shattered, and Osman Digna fled in disgrace. Alula, though wounded, stood tall on the battlefield, bloodied but unbowed. Ethiopia had been defended, and its sovereignty remained intact. The Italian encroachment, betrayal, and resistance. Yet even as Ethiopia celebrated its triumph, another threat loomed from the north. The Italians, emboldened by European imperial ambitions, sought to claim the Red Sea coastline, violating the Hewitt Treaty. Alula, ever vigilant, saw through their deception. He had fought alongside the British to secure Ethiopia's borders, but now, those very allies had turned a blind eye to Italian aggression. His frustration boiled over in a conversation with Augustus B. Wildey, a British diplomat. What does England mean by destroying Hewitt's treaty and allowing the Italians to take my country from me? Did I not relieve the Egyptian garrison in the Bogos country? Did I not fight at Kassala when it was too late? Have I not done everything I could? You English used us to do what you wanted, and then left us. The betrayal stung, but Alula did not waste time mourning the loss of British support. Instead, he prepared for war. He knew the Italians had superior firepower, but he also knew the land, and most importantly, he knew the heart of an Ethiopian warrior could not be conquered by mere bullets. The Battle of Dogali, a message to Europe. By late 1886, the Italians had pushed further into Ethiopian territory, establishing a fortified presence at Sati and Massawa. Alula, refusing to watch his homeland be carved up by foreign powers, assembled his forces and advanced toward the enemy. The first skirmish took place on January 25, 1887, at Sati, where Alula's forces faced heavy resistance. Despite the losses, he did not retreat. Instead, he regrouped and struck back the following day at Dogali, where Ethiopian warriors swarmed the Italian relief column like a tidal wave. The battle was brutal. Italian soldiers, well-armed and highly trained, fought desperately, but they were no match for Alula's strategic brilliance. The Ethiopian fighters, wielding spears and swords, stormed through the enemy lines. Colonel Tommaso de Cristoforis, the Italian commander, was slain. along with 400 of his men. The message was clear. Ethiopia was no weak African state to be colonized at will. The victory at Dogali sent shockwaves through Europe. Italy, humiliated and outraged, demanded revenge. But Ras Alula was undeterred. He had fought against Egyptians, Mahdists, and now Italians. Each battle was a new chapter in his life as the defender of the empire. Chapter 3. Clash with the Invaders. The winds of war swept across the Ethiopian highlands, carrying with them the echoes of a nation's defiance. Ras Alula, now a battle-hardened general, had spent decades safeguarding the empire against foreign aggressors. But, as the 19th century neared its end, a new and formidable enemy threatened Ethiopia's sovereignty: Italy. Their encroachment on Ethiopian land was no longer subtle. They had crossed the line, and Alula knew that if he did not act swiftly, his beloved nation would be consumed by imperial ambitions. A ticking time bomb. Italy's deception. The Italians, under the guise of diplomacy, had crept into Ethiopian territory, stationing troops in Massawa and advancing further inland. Alula, a master strategist, recognized their intentions early. He had already repelled Egyptian and Mahdist invasions, but the Europeans posed a different kind of threat. They wielded not only superior firepower, but also political deception. The Treaty of Ushale, signed in 1889, was meant to be a peace agreement between Emperor Menelik II and the Italians. However, the Amharic and Italian versions of the treaty were different, an intentional trick by the colonizers. While the Ethiopian text recognized a friendship between the two nations, the Italian version falsely claimed that Ethiopia had become an Italian protectorate. When Menelik discovered the treachery, he rejected the treaty outright. War was inevitable, but before Menelik could rally his forces, Ras Alula had already taken up arms. He had seen this game before, foreigners pretending to be allies, only to seize land and power. He would not let it happen on his watch. The first strike, the Battle of Coatit, 1895. In the early morning of January 13, 1895, Italian troops under General Oreste Baratieri moved toward Coatit, a strategic point near the Eritrean border. Baratieri believed his modern weaponry and disciplined forces would easily crush the Ethiopians. He did not know that he was facing one of the greatest military minds in African history. Alula, leading an army of warriors armed with swords, spears, and a few firearms, launched a surprise attack. The battle was fierce. Ethiopian warriors moved like shadows across the battlefield, striking with terrifying precision. Though the Italians had rifles and artillery, they were unprepared for the relentless wave of Ethiopian resistance. By the end of the battle, Alula's forces had shattered the Italian front, forcing them into a disorganized retreat. It was a humiliating defeat for Italy, and it sent a clear message: Ethiopia would not be conquered easily. The road to Adwa. A nation unites. Despite his victory at Coatit, Alula knew the war was far from over. The Italians, enraged by their loss, regrouped and advanced deeper into Ethiopian territory. This time, Emperor Menelik II himself took charge, rallying a vast army of Ethiopian warriors from every corner of the empire. Though Alula was no longer the empire's highest-ranking general, his experience and leadership were indispensable. Menelik recognized this and placed him at the heart of the Ethiopian defense. Alongside legendary commanders like Ras Mekonnen and Empress Taitu Betul, Alula prepared for the ultimate confrontation, the Battle of Adwa. On March 1, 1896, the mountains of Adwa bore witness to a battle that would change history. Italian forces, over 17,000 strong, marched in with the confidence of an empire that had crushed African nations before. But Ethiopia was no ordinary land, and Alula was no ordinary warrior. The battle unfolded like a grand symphony of war. Horns blared, swords clashed, and gunfire filled the air. The Italians, expecting an easy victory, were met with a nightmare. Ethiopian forces encircled them, cutting off their supply lines and striking with unmatched ferocity. Alula, leading one of the key Ethiopian divisions, fought like a man possessed, his sword cutting through enemy lines as his soldiers overwhelmed the invaders. By midday, the Italian army was in full retreat. Over 6,000 of their soldiers lay dead, and thousands more were captured. Ethiopia had done what no other African nation had achieved. It had defeated a European colonial power in open battle. Adwa was not just a military victory, it was a declaration of sovereignty to the world. It shattered the myth of European invincibility and inspired resistance movements across Africa. And at the heart of it all was Ras Alula, the man who had spent his life defending his homeland from invaders. A legacy of resistance. After the victory at Adwa, Ethiopia forgot her heroic war general. The political system discriminated against him, despite his leadership in multiple vital wars against foreign powers. Though Adwa was a crowning moment in Ethiopian history, Alula's personal journey was nearing its end. He had fought countless battles, secured his nation's borders, and ensured that Ethiopia remained free. But power dynamics had shifted. Menelik, now emperor, focused on consolidating his rule, and Alula found himself sidelined in political affairs. Still, he remained a warrior to the last. Even as he aged, he never wavered in his duty to Ethiopia. When he finally took his last breath in 1897, he did so knowing that his homeland stood unconquered. Ras Alula's name was more than just a title. It was a symbol of defiance, strength, and unbreakable will. He was the lion who roared against invaders, the shield that protected Ethiopia, and the spirit that still inspires generations. Thank you for watching. If you like our approach to teaching English, please like, share, and subscribe to Quest Advanced English. If you think we need to improve something, let us know in the comments section. And tell us whose story we should cover next.